Okay, now in this particular module, we are going to focus on developing generative AI solutions with Azure OpenAI Service. Let me tell you, this is one of the most important modules of Azure AI because OpenAI integration with Azure is one of the most popular in-demand thing in the organizations nowadays. And this demand is only going to increase in the coming few years. So this module is going to be very important for you. The agenda of this module is actually focusing on 4 sections. First one is we are going to understand what is Azure OpenAI Service and what kind of offerings it's providing to us. Then we are going to focus on developing apps with Azure OpenAI Service. After this, we'll apply prompt engineering techniques with Azure OpenAI Service. And last but not the least, we are going to use something which is use your own data with Azure OpenAI Service, which is formally known as RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And that's something which is one of the most popular topics of this particular module. Now let's see this thing one by one. So let's get started with Azure OpenAI Service. Now I hope before starting this module, you guys are familiar that what is an OpenAI and what this service is actually providing to you. If you are familiar with ChatGPT, then OpenAI is a company which is behind ChatGPT product. The generation part of the OpenAI services are actually going to help us in Azure Cloud, where we can call Azure OpenAI APIs and then we can develop our applications with integration of that. And that's exactly what we are going to focus. The first module, we are going to have this kind of learning objectives. First, we are going to describe what is generative AI. Then we are going to provision a resource and we are going to deploy a model with that. And then after that, we are going to use Azure OpenAI Studio. So what is generative AI? Well, basically, artificial intelligence is something which is started in early 1950s and 1960s. Now, this is something which is a field of computer science that seeks to create intelligent machines that can replicate or exceed human intelligence. Now, this definition and this concept is not new as it is there from decades. But then the evolution of this particular topic has happened, and very recently we got a lot of compelling features which are coming up with that. And that is what this slide is trying to show you. For almost 3 to 4 decades, we did not got any much smart computers or intelligent computing kind of things. But then somewhere in 1990s, we got machine learning, which is a subset of AI that enables machine to learn from existing data. And that is a place where using our experiments, we can create models, and those models are going to help your machine to learn. Based on that, we can improve upon that data and we can make decisions or predictions. This was the phase where we got machine learning with neural network and all. Later on, somewhere after 2010, we got something which is known as deep learning, which is also one of the technique of machine learning, which is going to use layers of neural networks to process the data and then make decisions in a much faster way. This deep learning mechanism has picked up very much for predictions and then making different kind of decisions based on the input. But the actual usage of that, it all started after 2020s. And this is a phase which we are going right now. In this case, we have generative AI, which is again a kind of a deep learning implementation, but this is something which is allowing you to generate a new text-based, visual and auditory content based on the given natural language input, which is known as prompt. When you are providing this kind of natural language input, and if you're generating a new content based on that, that is what generative AI is all about. Now, although there are so many popular generative AI models and frameworks available in the market from different organizations, undoubtedly, OpenAI and generative AI models which are provided by OpenAI, which are formerly known as GPT models, are one of the most popular and one of the most in-demand models. And that's exactly what we are going to use and learn in this module. In order to use Azure OpenAI Service with Azure Cloud subscription, you need to first make a request to Microsoft. As you can see in this slide, we have a URL which is aka.ms/OAI apply. You have to go to this URL and you have to request for an approval. If Microsoft is going to approve your request, then only you'll be able to use Azure OpenAI resource and you'll able to create that in your subscription. Normally, when you make a request, it's going to take 2 to 3 business days to approve your request based on the details which you have provided. On the successful approval, you will be able to create an Azure OpenAI Service resource, mostly same like all other resources which you create in Azure portal. You can also optionally use Azure CLI commands to create Azure OpenAI Service. And once you have Azure OpenAI Service provision in your subscription, you will be able to use your OpenAI language generation capability models, which are formerly GPT-3, GPT-4 specific models. In order to use Azure OpenAI, we have Azure OpenAI Studio. Same like all other studios, you have Azure OpenAI Studio, which is going to help you to create and deploy models. It's going to help you to connect with your own data as well as train your models based on some custom schemas and data. And it's also going to help you in fine-tuning your data with some kind of custom models and data files which you want to integrate. If you want to do the testing of your models which are deployed there without developing any application, then there are some test playgrounds also available. Basically, as of now, at the time of recording, we have Chat Playground, we have Completion Playground, and we have DALL-E Playground, which are now stable and available inside Azure OpenAI Studio. Chat Playground is the one which is mostly going to be used in this module, and that is a playground which is associated with chat completion. This chat completion model is going to help you to generate textual content, and it is also going to help you to generate a code in some specific programming languages like C# and Python and JavaScript, and these models are the ones which are extensively used for developing applications with generative AI. On the other hand, we have older completions also, which are basically GPT-3 and earlier models. This completion playground is also available, and completion models are going to use to generate a larger text with a little smaller size models, which are actually GPT-3 or earlier models. Basically, the biggest difference between GPT-3 and 3.5 models are the number of parameters on which it got trained. As we know, GPT 3.5 onwards, especially GPT 4.0 and all, are actually those models which are trained with trillions of parameters. And this is something which is making a big difference in generating a specific content with that. Now, if we talk about DALL-E right now, DALL-E is a playground which is based on a DALL-E model which is provided by Azure OpenAI. When you're going with DALL-E, you will be able to generate images. These images will be uniquely generated, and that is also something which is a part of this course which we are going to focus. Now, let's talk about types of generative AI models. Basically, you have 4 types of model families, which is visible here on this particular slide. The newer GPT-4 models are generally the best choice for all the language and code generation tasks if you are going to develop a new application from scratch. Most of the time there are chances that you're going to use GPT-4 models. In some cases, you're going to use GPT-3 family also. If you are just focusing on some natural language and code generation models and you're not looking for some additional features or updated data associated with GPT-4, then you can go with optionally GPT-3. GPT-3 models were also having some other segregations inside that, like we have some 4 older models inside that, which is Ada, Babbage, Curie, and Da Vinci. And those are the older family of the GPT models. Now, if you want to use those models are also available in Azure OpenAI Studio on an approval request. So you have to request to Microsoft, and based on that, they'll approve it. We also have embedding models, which are the models which are used for embedding kind of a specific task. Now, these embedding models are going to use a specialized form of data encoding, which is going to optimize a specific task like text similarities or searching a specific text or searching some kind of a code inside that. In certain cases, you're going to use specific embedding models also. Last but not the least, we have DALL-E model, which is an image generation based on the natural language prompt. We are going to see DALL-E practically with the playground as well as with the application code. So let's discuss it at that time. As of now, it's a model for image generation. Just keep that thing in your mind. So how can we deploy a generative AI model? Now, even though we are going to see this thing in the demo, when you go to your Azure OpenAI Studio, in the left side section, you have deployment section. This is a place where you can deploy one or more instances of your each available model. Once you select your existing model, like in the screenshot, I'm selecting GPT-35 Turbo, you have to specifically specify the model version, and then you have to give a user-friendly deployment name for that. This deployment name has to be unique within that particular Azure OpenAI Service instance, and this name is going to be used while developing application. So when you are writing a code in your application, you have to specify your deployed model name, and that deployed model name is going to be used during the application request response. Because all the things are driven with this deployed model and the API request response in JSON format, the model name is going to be important, and the model version is also going to be important. For a specific features, you have to maybe choose a specific model version. Also, the number of deployments which you can do inside your Azure OpenAI service depends on the quota which is allocated to your service instance. Now this quota is also available in this Azure OpenAI Studio in the left side column. You can go there, you can check your existing quota, or if you want, you can request for the higher quota. Now if you want to understand Azure OpenAI code generation as well as the text generation, you have to understand one thing first, which is known as prompt. And then when you are going to generate a content based on some specific prompt input, that generated response is actually known as completion. So before we move forward, just understand these two basic terminologies of ChatGPT or Azure OpenAI. The first one is prompt, the second one is completion. Now every time when you provide any natural language input, that input is going to be known as prompt. Now the same terminologies are used with ChatGPT software also, and the same terminologies are used here in the generative AI of Azure OpenAI. When you are providing a prompt, which is a natural language input, this model is going to process that input, and based on that is going to give you some kind of a response. That response is actually known as completion. As you can see here in the slide, this column is showing you some examples of the prompt which you can give, and then based on those prompts, whatever responses which we can expect from the system, that is something which is known as completion. Now we have a different kind of a segregated task which are given here. For example, if you see, we have a classifying content. If you want to do a classification of the content, you can specify an input prompt like this, that there is a tweet, I enjoyed the training course, and then you're just specifying sentiment, which indirectly you are telling to the model that I want to find the sentiment of this particular statement. The response of that is going to come in the completion, that the statement is positive. Now, same way, you can also specify a task for generating a new content where you are saying write a poem about databases, and right side is going to give you in completion that database or database. You keep our information safe. From the small to the large, you store our data in a place. Now that's a poem which is generated as a response of this prompt. Same way, you can just pause this particular video right now and you can check some of these prompts which are available here. These are some of the common techniques for summarization, transformation or translation, as well as the most commonly one which are used in the below section are question answering and chat. Because whenever you ask question, it's going to give you the answer, or maybe you can do a multi-turn conversation using a chat prompt. Now, this is the time, it's a point where we have to understand completion playground and chat playground properly. Now, because we are going to see the lab exercise associated with this, we are going to see these two playgrounds at that time. As of now, I'm not provisioning the service, but yes, exactly after this, we are going to do the demo in which we need to understand how we can provision Azure OpenAI service and how we can use our playgrounds very well. Now let's focus on develop apps with Azure OpenAI service. The learning objectives of this modules are like this. First, we are going to integrate Azure OpenAI into our application. We're going to use the REST API service so that we can understand how the request and response is happening inside that. As well as after that, we are going to focus on how we can use the language specific SDKs which are available with Azure OpenAI service. Now, when you're integrating Azure OpenAI into your application, remember one thing first. Your application is going to submit a prompt to the deployed models, which are deployed on your Azure OpenAI service instance. Your responses are known as completions, as we discussed, and when you're going to send the request, you have to make sure that which endpoint you're using. Basically, there are three different options which are available here. You can use completion model, and when you're using completion model, the endpoint for that is going to be different. This model takes an input prompt and is going to generate one or more predicted completions based on that. You can use embeddings model endpoint also, and this model is going to take input and it returns a vector representation of that. And in our case, when we are going to develop applications, we are going to use chat completion, which is going to take an input in a form of chat conversion, where we have multiple roles which we need to specify. And when we are specifying those role specific messages, we are going to send that in the prompt. And based on that, we are going to have a chat completion which is going to be generated. In this full module, we are only going to use chat completion practically when we write a code. But before we do that thing, let's understand how we can send the request and get the response based on the OpenAI REST APIs for these different endpoints. As you can see here on the slide, if you are trying to request on the completion endpoint, the URL is going to be the base URL / OpenAI deployments, and then you're choosing a deployment which is completions. In the request, you're going to send your prompt as well as the max tokens which you're going to be using for this. Now in this case, the max token is going to specify number of maximum tokens which you are using for this prompt. Now, how you want to calculate the tokens is something which you can understand through tokenizer, which is available on OpenAI website. You can use a tokenizer to understand how many tokens will be generated and how it is going to be processed. As this is out of the scope of this particular course, we are not focusing on that right now. I'm assuming you will go to OpenAI website and you'll check the tokenizer. When you send this request, you're going to get the response, which is basically showing you the text completion response. It's generated based on the model, which is GPT-35 Turbo, and it's showing you in the response that the input prompt which you provided was your favorite Shakespeare play is, and then they are just specifying the answer of that, which is Macbeth. When you're doing this thing, this is a very simple way to do request response because this is an older completion endpoint. Suppose if you are trying embedding endpoint, then the URL is going to change with the end, which is embeddings, and then while sending the request, you're not going to specify max tokens, you're only going to specify input prompt. We are specifying an input prompt which is like the food was delicious and the waiter was very friendly. This is maybe a kind of a review which we are specifying here in the input, and in the response, in the completion, we are just trying to specify that this is going to convert that into vectors. So you can see in the right side, they are showing me the embedding object, which is ultimately an array of vectors which are generated based on this. They're also specifying the specific model with the version which is used, which is text embedding EDA-002. Finally, if you use the chat completion endpoint, which is a little complex, but the important one for the natural language text generation with this, you can see in this URL, we are specifying /chat/completion at the end. While sending the prompt, you are actually going to have an array kind of a JSON object. Inside the JSON object, you have an array which is messages, in which you're going to specify different roles and then the statement associated with the role. For example, the first role is actually system. Now, if you remember, when we have done the demo of your Azure OpenAI chat playground, inside that there was something called system message. This role system is actually providing a content for the same system message. Then we have a role user, which is going to provide an initial prompt input in the user chat box. And then what kind of a response, what kind of completion is going to be given by that particular chatbot is something which is given in the next statement, which is role assistant. So basically, by providing one combination of user and assistant input, you are providing one example that how you should ask a question and what kind of response you're expecting. This kind of an input is known as one-shot learning, and if you provide more than one examples here, it's going to be known as few-shot learning. Now we'll go into this little depth later on when we go for prompt engineering techniques. But as of now, this is something like you're specifying a message for the system that you are an assistant that teaches people about AI. Then you're specifying an example user statement, which is, does an Azure OpenAI support multiple languages? And you are also mentioning the response which should be there from the assistant. After specifying this one short example, you are saying the final content, which is the user is asking, do other cognitive services also support translation? And if you provide this input as a whole, it's going to give you the completion as a response with the message with the role assistant, and it's going to show you yes, the other Azure Cognitive Service also support translation. Just point which you need to note right now is when you are using a chat completion is actually going to calculate your prompt tokens which are used in the completion as well as in the prompt. So you can see right now it's showing you prompt token is 95, completion token is 84, and total tokens which are used for this full request and response is actually 179. Your billing for this particular request and response is going to be based on how many number of tokens you have consumed in that. And that's how you have to pay for that. This slide is showing you a pseudocode which is associated with Azure OpenAI SDK when you're using it with Microsoft C#. Now this code looks very straightforward and simple. You are using a namespace which is Azure AI.OpenAI, which is the main library associated with this SDK. Using that, you're going to create an instance of a client. This is OpenAI client. So while creating the client instance, you are specifying your specific unique endpoint of the Azure OpenAI service and your key. Remember, endpoint and keys are going to help you to create a client instance. Using this client instance, you can actually specify what kind of a completion you are associated with. And that is what we are doing in somewhere in the last section of this code. But before we do that thing, we have to make sure that we configure chat completion options. This chat completion option is going to define your configuration for the messages array. Basically, in this, you can specify multiple statements for your role system, role user, as well as role assistant. And then you can also specify customized configurational options like temperature, max token, deployment name, etc. Remember, the deployment name should match with the name of your model which you have deployed in that. And once you have this chat completion options configured, you can use that object while calling this method, which is get chat completions, using the client object. This is going to make a request to the OpenAI service using this SDK. And then once you get the response, we are just trying to get the values of the response and trying to print the content into that particular console.write line. It's a super simple code. When we develop application, we are going to use exactly same code with C#. In case if you are not fond of C# and you prefer Python while developing application, this is a code which is actually showing you the same thing but with the Python syntax. You are adding a package which is Azure OpenAI from OpenAI, and then you are trying to create a client object using which you are just going to specify client.chat.completions.create method. This function is going to take all these optional parameters, and then using that you can choose your choice of deployed model which can be generating your prompt configuration with that. In spite of this slide, it is always better to understand this while doing the lab exercise. So it's the time we are going to move forward to our lab exercise, which is integrating Azure OpenAI into your application. And that's exactly next which we are going to do. I strongly request you to do this lab exercise practically, and if you're done with that, move forward to next module where we are going to apply prompt engineering techniques. Hey guys, sorry for interruption. My name is Maruti and I'm here to make a very important announcement. I hope you are liking our videos and you're doing a continuous learning with us on an Azure Cloud and AI related topics. If you are enjoying this thing, I'm going to announce skilltech.club, which is our upcoming website, which is going to be launched very soon. We are here to tell you one thing, that everyone who is a subscriber of this particular channel will get Azure Cloud and Azure AI related certification courses free of cost in skilltech.club. So you will be a part of the skilltech.club kind of a membership automatically free of cost. And everyone who's a subscriber of this particular channel will get those benefits which are available in that. So what are you waiting for? I request you to please subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends and families if they are also interested in Azure Cloud and AI learning. That's it from my side. Now you can carry on with your learning. Thank you. Okay, so now it's the time to deal with this lab, which is integrate Azure OpenAI into your app. I hope you have gone through the basic concept of OpenAI and how Azure OpenAI is allowing you to use all the GPT-based models associated with that. I'm sure you have gone through the playground, which are already part of your Azure OpenAI service, and this lab is actually going to show you how you can integrate Azure OpenAI in your own application which you're developing. I have already launched my lab environment. It's the time to log in into that. So that's what we're going to do. Now we'll follow the instructions and we will try to integrate Azure OpenAI deployment completions with our application. So let's get started. First thing first, all I have to do is I have to open my browser. We'll log into our cloud slice, which is provided with this. So I'm going to portal.azure.com. Just make sure that, guys, when you're going to do the same lab in your own subscription, you have to enable Azure OpenAI Service first, and for that you have to make a request to Microsoft. Now I hope this is something which is already discussed in the previous part of this particular video. You already know that you have to go to OAI Open Access associated page, and then you have to request for Azure OpenAI access on your subscription. Then only you'll be able to provision this particular service in your subscription. In our case, this lab environment is already having that, so we already signed into our Azure portal, and the next thing which we are going to do is we are going to create Azure OpenAI service. In order to do this, I'm going to click on create resource and I'm going to search for Azure OpenAI. Now this service is as of now part of a separate service, which is Azure OpenAI Service. Very soon we actually have a separate service which is going to be combining all the Azure AI services inside that. But just make sure when you provision the service, which is Azure OpenAI, this is going to be the icon of that particular service, which is right now available on Azure Cloud like this. I'm going to click on create. We're going to choose our same subscription and same resource group, and then we are going to provide a specific name. Make sure when you provide a name, it has to be unique. So I'm just giving Azure OAI SVC with some number. And then you have to make sure that you are choosing the region which are mentioned in the lab environment, because maybe it's not going to be available in all the regions. After this, we are going to provide a pricing tier is going to be standard S0. That's the only option which we have. And everything else is fine. We'll just click on next, next, and then once validation is passed, we are going to click on create. Now while this deployment is going on, we have to make sure that once this is done, we have to deploy a model. Now this model is going to be created inside your Azure OpenAI Studio, and then inside that you have to provide a proper configuration. There are chances that based on your OpenAI service and your subscription, you will get a specific models which you can deploy inside that. Now once the deployment is done, we'll proceed with that, and then we will configure our deployment with the model which is GPT-35 Turbo 16K. This is the one which we are going to use in this particular lab environment. Okay, my deployment is completed. I'm going to click on go to resource. This is my Azure OpenAI service, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to click on go to Azure OpenAI Studio. Okay, my Azure OpenAI Studio is launched. Now just make sure when you're doing this lab, please do not go into the newer version of this studio. You can see that it's giving me a pop-up that this OpenAI Studio is getting a new look very soon. Do you want to explore the new experience? No, we do not want it as of now. So you just make sure you're going to close all these extra pop-ups which are there. Even GPT-4o, which is the latest version as of now at the time of this recording, is available in this particular service, but we do not want to use it right now. We are going to strictly follow the instructions of the lab, which is actually going to use GPT-35 Turbo 16K. So in order to do that, we are already there in the studio. We will go to the section called deployments, and inside the deployments we are going to create a new deployment. This new deployment name I can give anything. I'm going to give something like meaningful. I'm giving my name GPT-35 T16K. So this is a GPT-35 Turbo. I'm going to choose that same model which is going to be available in the drop down, which is here. And then the model version, the deployment type, I do not want to change anything in that. We just want to make sure that tokens per minute, which is available here in the quota, that is something which we are going to change from 120K to only 5K. We do not want 120K for this particular lab example. So we are okay with 5K or 4K kind of a range. Now, once that is done, everything else is fine, I think. Content filter is disabled, and in this case it's choosing this one, but we are going to choose default. Enable dynamic quota, we do not want this thing. We are going to disable the dynamic quota, and we are going to click on create. Now, right now we are choosing the same configuration which is available here, but yeah, when you're going to work in the real projects, maybe you need to change this thing accordingly. My deployment is successfully done, but remember one thing, guys, when you create a deployment here, there are chances that this deployment is going to take approximately 5 or maybe 7 minutes sometimes to just configure this properly, and after that only you will be able to use it. As of now, I'm moving forward, but if it is not working fine, I will come back, I'll wait for a few minutes, and then I will use that. Right now, let's go back to our Visual Studio code, and we are going to clone the repository. Now, obviously, we need to see certain things in the Azure OpenAI Studio Playgrounds, but before we do that thing, let's start the cloning of the repository. Git clone is a command. I'm going to provide a URL of this repository, which is this. Just make sure, guys, this is official Microsoft Learning repository. If you also want to clone this thing in your local environment, all you have to do is you need to install Git, and then you can use it using this particular URL. You'll be able to clone, and you'll be able to get the same samples inside that. This repository is actually going to provide sample applications in C# as well as Python. And throughout this particular lab, we are going to use C# as our preferred language. If you are not comfortable with C#, you can go with the Python kind of a version also. In my case, once my repository is cloned, all I have to do is I have to check whether the sample applications are available or not. So let's see that. I have a lab files, and inside the lab files I have Azure OpenAI API. This is the one which we are going to use in this particular sample. It has C#, it has Python, and it has a text file kind of a folder. I'm going to use C# folder, and inside that we are having our program.cs, app settings.json. These are the files which we need in this particular lab. Now, as of now, before I proceed and do some customization with this, which is configuring your application, I want to make sure that my model is working fine. And in order to do that thing, I'm going back to my Azure OpenAI Studio. Because I have created GPT-35 Turbo based deployment, I will go to the chat completion. This is my chat playground where I can try the chat completion and I can see whether it's working fine or not. So I'm just going to try it here inside this browser, reducing the screen size a little bit. This chat playground is always having 3 sections: setup section for template and system message. We have this section which is actually allowing you to put some particular chat, and it's going to give you the response here. And then we have a configuration where you can choose your deployment model as well as the parameters which will help you to control the randomness and the other configurations of your response. In my case, my deployment model is visible here. I just want to check this is working or not. So I'm going to simply ask certain things like hi. If it is responding, is saying yes, hello, how can I assist you today? And then I can ask any question and it's going to give me the answer associated with that. Now let's say I'm just going to ask a simple question that next week I am traveling to London. Can you help me with some good places to visit? Now when I ask this question, it's going to find its knowledge and the base, and then it's going to give me some suggestions with that. It's giving me some kind of an answer that of course London is a vibrant city with plenty of attractions to explore. And then because this is right now an AI assistant, it's going to help people to find information. It's giving me information about the popular places which may consider for visiting, and then it's giving me a list of around 10 places which are there. Now this is something which is showing me that my model is working fine, and if that is true, I need to go to deployments, and from this one I actually need one thing, which is this deployment name. This is a name which is going to be useful, so I'm just going to copy that. Now it's the time we have to go back to our application, and the next thing is we are going to go into this particular project where we have to add one package. So let me just right click on my project folder, open an integrated terminal. We'll add this package, which is azure.ai.openai with the specific version. So I'm just going to execute command. It's going to add the packages. It's showing me right now that we could not find any project in this particular one. Okay, I think we have Azure OpenAI API which we have opened. Okay, we need to go and do this thing in C# folder. This is my mistake. You have to be inside the folder actually in order to add the package, and that should be the same folder. So I actually have to do this thing in C# folder. And now if I execute this, it's going to work. Yeah, this is now finding that project, is adding the package, and I think it will be done very soon. Yes, the package installation is done. Next we have to configure app settings.json. So let's go into app settings.json, which is looking for three things: my deployment name of the model, my OpenAPI key, and the endpoint. Now as I said, the first thing and the only thing which is required from the studio is actually this model name. So we'll copy this, we'll paste it here, and then my endpoint and key is something which I can take it from my service. So logically I can take it from here also, but it is better you should go to your portal.azure.com as usual, like all the Azure AI services. I'm going into portal.azure.com, going into my service which I have provisioned, and then in the left side section we will have keys and endpoint. We'll copy key, paste it here, and same for the endpoint. We'll save the configurational file, and if that is done, you can see that it's asking me to change this endpoint, key, and deployment name, and we are done with that, so we just save that file. Now it's the time we have to add a code to use Azure OpenAI Service, and this is where you're actually going to write your code with prompts and other configurations. So we're going into program.cs file of this particular project. The first thing is we have to add a namespace which is using azure.ai.openai. This is a new namespace because this is OpenAI service. It has a different namespace associated with that. If you check the logical code, we are trying to use iConfigurational object, and which is allowing you to fetch the values of your endpoint, key, and the deployment name. And these values are going to be useful while creating the object associated with your OpenAI service. And that is exactly what we are going to do in the second step. So we have a section which is initialize the Azure OpenAI client, in which we just have 2 lines of code, which is this. We are going to specify that we want to create an OpenAI client with this particular endpoint and the credentials, as well as we are configuring one system message, which is just a basic simple input message right now, which is going to be used as an initial input. Now you can put anything, whatever you want here in this system message, but that's going to be the initial input which we will provide into your prompt. After this, we are just going into the next section, which is add code to send request section, which is exactly below this. So this is a simple console logic where we are trying to read the input and we are trying to see what is coming from that. And this is a section which is add code to send request. This is that section which is actually going to send a request to my chat completion model. And you can see right now that's the reason we have chat completion options. We are specifying that system message which we have declared on the top. We are providing the input message text if I want to specify something in the user message, and then we are configuring configurational parameters like max tokens, temperature, and deployment name, which is going to be taken from that variable called OAI deployment name, which is actually our deployment name. After this, using the client object, all we are going to do is we are going to call a method which is get chat completion. this is the method which is going to take this chat completion options which we have configured about this, and then it's going to give me the response. Whatever response we are getting into that, we just want to print the response so that we can understand what exactly we have received from that. Simple logic, simple code. It's the time we have to save this application and we have to run the application so that we can see whether it's working or not. Let me save this. Let me execute a command, .NET run. It's going to take the system message, it's going to pass on that configuration, and now when it is asking me for which prompt I want to enter inside that, I am going to provide this prompt, which is like, what hike should I do near Rainier? Now let's just wait for this application to load the full configuration first. If without any errors it's going to execute the application, we will provide the prompt. Yes, it is successfully done. It's asking me for the prompt. Well, I cannot do it with this, so I'm just going to right click there. This is a question which we are putting here. It's sending the request, wait for the object to return the response with that, and yep, I think we got the response, which is actually showing me the options like Skyline Train, then I can go for Nations Peak Loop, or I can go to Comet Falls Trail. Now all those things are actually something which is coming from the response. We got that. Now we can also provide the prompt which is going to be something different, like where should I hike near Boise. Now let me just put it here in the prompt, and then I'm going to hit enter. This is again going to take this as an input and it's going to give me the response. Yes, now I got a different response and it's giving me details about my new prompt. It's working fine, which means that everything is cool. The temperature is actually working fine. Now right now this is temperature 0.7. If I change it to 1 and then if I save and rerun the application, obviously my output is going to be slightly changed even if I provide the same prompt. Now that's how the temperature behaves for the randomness. We can also do multi-turn conversation history, which is the next part of this, and in this case we can actually execute some particular prompt, so we can run the application again to provide the prompt like where is a good hike near Boise, and then we can also ask the next question like how difficult is the second hike you suggested. So let me ask this question directly, because we just now added the second hike which is here, and we want to see whether it's actually able to understand that this is the second hike or not. Now this is able to understand that thing. Is saying the difficulty of the second hike I suggested near Rainier National Park can be vary depending on the level of fitness, hiking experience, however. So it's giving me the response which is proper with that. And then we can also associate that, let's say in our application we need to add a previous prompt and the response in the future prompt, and then that is something which you can customize inside the system message. Now I'm not doing this customization here because by default it's going to remember this, because my execution is going on for the same application right now, so I do not want to change that code. But yes, if you want to try this thing, let's do this thing right now. So we can go into the system message part. Let me just type quit here. So I want to terminate this application execution. Okay, so now we have to go into this particular section of this code where we have system message, and exactly below the system message we have to add this, which is initialize message list. We're going to add this code which is here. It's going to create a message list, and it's like a multi-turn conversation is going to be established with the help of this. After this, in order to make sure that we are able to send the request and then we are able to process multiple operations with that, we are going to implement the while loop. So in the add code to send request, which we have implemented earlier, we're actually going to change that code and we're going to replace that with this. So this is the add code to send request which we have added earlier. In spite of this particular one, we are actually going to change it. So let's just select this configuration, which is up to this. Now I'm removing this code right now, but if you want you can comment it, and we are going to implement the new code inside that. Once this new code is changed, we can just save the file. We can run this particular file using .NET run. Let's see how it is working this time. This time we are going to ask multiple questions and we want to see whether it's going to do the multi-turn conversation with that or not. So yes, it's asking me to enter my prompt. I'm going to provide this prompt, which is this, what is a good hike near, boys? It's giving me the response. And now I'm going to provide the second question, how difficult it is. And it's giving me the response that the Shuffle Buttle Trail Works Basin Recreation Area is considered the moderate height. While this is not extremely difficult, whatever. It's giving me the answer, is able to remember that conversation with that. And obviously you'll likely get a response about the second hike the model suggested, which provides a much more realistic conversation kind of thing. So user experience will be improved if you do this kind of conversational configuration with this prompt. With this particular sample application is done, and it's the time we have to focus on the next lab. Next step is we have to clean up these resources. I will do that thing, but I want you to make sure that you also do that right now. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next lab.